One of the scariest things about being charged with a criminal offense once you get out of jail and you have that resolved is figuring out how you're going to go on and lead your normal life. In particular, how you're going to talk to your boss about this criminal offense that you've been charged with. Now, it's not something that always comes up, but in a lot of positions, it will be something. You may have missed work because you were incarcerated, or your work may involve background checks or checks on your driver's license. So you know that this is going to come up, and it's going to be a conversation that you have to have. Once you've been charged, you can't control the fact that you've been charged with an offense. You can control the narrative, and you can control how that comes to the attention of your employer. And often there are a lot of options to staying at the job that you're at. But the first step is understanding how to address it and how to make sure that your employer feels confident keeping you on or hiring you for that job. This is one of the more difficult decisions to make early on when you're still sorting out all the things that you're worried about. So understanding how to have this conversation is really important because it is a very delicate subject matter, and if you're charged with an alcohol or drug-related offense, it can be something that will be concerning to your employer, or sometimes you're in the process of looking for a job. So you have to have this conversation with your potentially your future employer. And you need to know how to talk about it, because there is a difference between being convicted of a crime and being charged with a crime. And you want to make sure that you are responsive and that you are honest about it, but you're comfortable about talking about it so that you can make your employer also comfortable with it and see a path forward for both of you working together. One of the things that people are tempted to do is keep that from their employer, and sometimes that is possible, and it frankly is none of their business, particularly if you have a job that's very much unrelated to the conduct that you've been charged with. But often when you're applying for a job, they're going to run a background check, and that background check may show that you have been arrested. And one of the worst mistakes that people make is to think, well, I don't want to talk about it, maybe they just won't find it. And the problem with that is once they do find the fact that you have been arrested, that closes the inquiry for future employers. They will no longer consider you as an applicant. And that's not necessarily always because you've been arrested and charged with a crime, but because you haven't been honest and candid about it. There are many jobs and many employers who will continue to consider you a great applicant despite the fact that you've had a criminal charge. But almost no employer will ever consider hiring somebody who's been dishonest. Usually when people are dishonest or don't disclose that on the background check, that immediately disqualifies them from being considered for that position. So drug and alcohol-related offenses can be some of the most terrifying to disclose to your employer. And that's the bad news. The good news is most of us, no matter what side of the table you're on, our lives have been touched by drug and alcohol abuse or addiction. And so most of us, whether it is your employer who has experience with it or one of their loved ones, we all understand the value in treatment and that this is something that happens to anyone at any stage in their life. And so it is easy for employers to forgive these kinds of charges and incidents when they know that you are actively seeking treatment or that you're taking it very seriously and it's not something that you're treating casually. So although it can be terrifying to have that conversation and initiate that conversation, in most cases when you carefully plan that conversation out, it can end up that you keep your job or you stay in the running for the job that you're applying to. Talking about rehab can feel very personal in a work environment. That makes us feel very vulnerable. And the idea of exposing yourself to more risk by having this conversation with your employer is very scary. And so the natural instinct is to sort of push it down and avoid that conversation entirely. One of the values of legal coaching is that we help you get comfortable having that conversation. And the more comfortable that you are having that conversation, the more comfortable your boss or future employer will be receiving that information. So it is something that it's important to practice. You want to understand how to have that conversation and how to talk about rehab, disclosing the necessary details, but certainly not over-disclosing, and understanding where that line is can be very valuable. So that's one of the things we work very closely with our clients on.